Wheeler Dealers made Ed China super famous, and even today, it's still the thing he's most known for. When the show was at its biggest and best, Ed seemed to have it all. He was famous all around the world, people admired him everywhere, and he got to do what he loved for his job. But Wheeler Dealers ended several years ago, and things haven't gone the way a lot of people thought they would. The life Ed is living right now looks really different, almost sad, compared to the success that people remember him having. And for fans who have followed him for years, that difference is really hard to watch and accept. So what's actually happening with Ed China these days? And how did someone who seemed to be living the dream end up in this situation? Stick with us as we dive into all the details and the full story. Remember Ed China before Wheeler Dealers. This is how his journey started. Edward John China was born on May 9, 1971, and way before television ever discovered him or knew his name, cars already had his complete attention and focus. Being a mechanic wasn't something he just stumbled into by accident later in life. It was built into him from a very early age. While other kids his age were just trying to figure life out as they went along, China was already totally focused and locked in, completely fascinated by how machines actually worked and how far you could push them before they would break down or fall apart. That deep curiosity and interest stayed with him all through his school years at King Edward's School in Whitley, Surrey, and followed him straight into London's South Bank University, where he studied engineering and product design. University wasn't just a place he went to get a degree or a stepping stone to something else. It was like a testing ground where he could prove himself. And it was right there, during his time at university, that the idea came together that would quietly and slowly change his entire life forever. The casual loafa wasn't created or built to become famous. Think about it, a sofa that you can actually drive sounds like it's just a silly joke until you understand and realize how carefully and precisely it was actually engineered and put together. China built this driving sofa to raise money for a Raleigh International Expedition trip to Belize, not to start or launch a career on TV. But once the loafa actually hit the road and started driving around, it did something that China couldn't predict or control at all. It made people stop whatever they were doing, stare at it with their mouths open, and ask all kinds of questions about it. That sofa didn't just move down the street. It announced who Ed China was to the world. From that point on, the doors to opportunity didn't just swing wide open all at once in one big moment. Instead, they cracked open bit by bit, slowly over time. In 1994, China got his very first job working in television behind the scenes as a special effects technician on a show called Father Ted. The work wasn't flashy or glamorous at all, but it really mattered and was important. It put him inside the world of television production, where he could learn exactly how things worked when the cameras weren't actually rolling and filming. By 1998, he was no longer this invisible person working in the background. China showed up as a guest on Top Gear Live, where he drove the casual loafa around Silverstone's live arena in front of a real audience. The idea of a sofa going in circles around one of Britain's most famous and iconic racing tracks really shouldn't have worked or made any sense, but somehow it totally did work. The complete absurdity and silliness of it pulled people in and got their attention. But the actual engineering and skill behind it kept them watching and interested. That exact same year, the loafa made another big leap forward when it appeared on a show called The Most Outrageous Jeremy Clarkson Video in the World Ever. At Thruxton Circuit, the sofa was raced around the track in a way that felt like it came straight out of the old cartoon show Wacky Races. It was ridiculous and silly, but also very deliberate and planned out. China wasn't just playing the fool or acting stupid. He was actually proving a real point, that even the most ridiculous and crazy ideas could still be built the right way with proper engineering. Television producers and networks started to take real notice of him. A show called The Big Breakfast brought him on 3 different separate times, and each time he appeared, he showcased and showed off a different creation he had built. The casual loafa came back, and it was joined by 2 other wild inventions, the bog standard and the street sleeper. Each vehicle pushed forward the same basic idea and message. Cars didn't have to look normal or right to be engineered properly and correctly. Around this same time period, China appeared on a show called Scrap Heap Challenge, which was known in the United States by the nom. Scrapyard Wars. The episode he was on focused specifically on driving beds and sofa cars, which placed China right exactly where he truly belonged. Surrounded by scrap metal, working under tight deadlines and time pressure, and facing impossible challenges, his particular skill set finally had the perfect stage to shine on. Then came one of the stranger and more unusual moments on television, on a show called This Is Your Life. China appeared during an episode that was celebrating a musician named Suggs. He actually drove the show's presenter, Michael Espel, through old memories from his past and delivered him to the television studio in the casual loafa itself. By that point in time, the sofa had become way more than just a vehicle or a mode of transportation. It had become part of Ed China's actual identity and who he was. A year later, China stepped into a role that was more defining and important as the resident designer on a BBC series called Panic Mechanics. This was a real shift and change in his career. It was less about novelty and funny stuff, and more about real responsibility and serious work. Around that same exact time, he went back and returned to Top Gear for a special feature called Build a Bond Car on a Budget. He was given a 200-pound Rover 800 car and just 100 pounds more to work with, and China somehow turned fantasy into actual function. He added James Bond-style gadgets to the car, including even an ejection seat, all without breaking or going over the budget limit. It was playful and fun, but also precise and well done. Every single joke rested on top of real, solid engineering work. By the year 2005, China was becoming a familiar face and presence on TV without ever feeling like he was overexposed or shown too much. He appeared on Ready Steady Cook for a special Children in Need charity episode, and then he co-hosted a short-lived show called Auto Trader alongside Mike Brewer that aired on the Discovery Channel. The pairing between them worked quietly and well. Nobody realized yet or understood how central and important that partnership between them would eventually become. In 2007, China appeared on a show called The Culture Show, where he drove comedian Arthur Smith and other performers around to different locations at the Edinburgh Festival. It was understated and pretty low-key, but it really fit who he was as a person. He never actually needed to be in the spotlight or the center of attention. He just needed a machine to work on and a good reason to do it. Around the same time, he also joined a Discovery Channel miniseries called Classic Car Club that explored and looked at the history and culture of classic cars. Working alongside Penny Mallory, Tony Mason, and Alex Riley, China leaned into what he had always done best. He respected the machines, respected the craft and skill involved, and spoke directly to people who cared about cars for reasons that went deeper than just how shiny they looked. Little by little, piece by piece, this is how Ed China's world slowly came together over the years. There was no overnight success story, no made-up or manufactured persona created for TV. Just years and years of strange and unusual ideas, solid and reliable engineering, and a man quietly carving out and creating a place for himself in the television world. And it's that slow, careful, and steady rise to fame that makes what happened to him later completely impossible to ignore or forget. How Ed China became the main star for Wheeler Dealers. In 2003, the Discovery Channel made a very deliberate and planned move. They decided to pair Ed China with television presenter Mike Brewer to be the hosts of a brand new car program that was called Wheeler Dealers. The show wasn't meant to be flashy or over the top with special effects. It wasn't built around crazy stunts or dangerous tricks. The basic idea was actually simple but also pretty risky. They would buy an old, tired, worn-out vehicle, fix it up properly and correctly, stick to a tight budget that couldn't be broken, and show every single step of the process along the way. There would be no hiding mistakes or mess-ups. No skipping over the hard parts that were difficult. What followed from that simple idea quietly rewrote and changed both men's entire careers forever. Wheeler Dealers didn't just work okay, it really clicked and connected with audiences. Right from the very beginning, the balance between the two hosts was super clear and obvious. Brewer would hunt down and find the cars, negotiating deals with sellers and chasing good value for the money. China would take those cars and bring them back from the edge of being junk. He'd have grease stuck under his fingernails, his sleeves rolled up high, and he'd calmly explain not just what he was doing with his hands, but exactly why each step mattered and was important. Viewers weren't talked down to like they were stupid or dumb. They weren't rushed past the important details too quickly. Instead, they were actually invited into the whole process to learn and understand. For 15 whole years, China became the steady heartbeat and core of the show. Across 13 different series that ran from 2003 all the way to 2017, he wasn't just fixing up old cars. He was building real trust with the audience watching at home. Each and every episode carried the same kind of pressure and challenge. There was a fixed budget they couldn't go over, real limitations they had to deal with, absolutely no shortcuts allowed, and no magic fixes that would make everything easy. If something broke or went wrong, China would repair it the right way. If a part failed and stopped working, he would replace it with a new one. If a car needed to be completely rethought and reimagined from the ground up, he would reinvent it entirely. Over time and with experience, that skill of his got sharper and better. You could actually see it clearly in his hands as he worked, in the way he paced himself through a job, and in the way he stayed completely calm and collected when things went wrong or didn't work out. Most importantly of all, he absolutely refused to fake anything or lie for the camera. He kept everything honest and real. Audiences watching responded really positively because the show felt completely real and genuine to them. China's enthusiasm and excitement never looked forced or put on for the cameras. His true passion for vehicles of all different kinds came through naturally in everything he did. Whether he was dealing with a modest everyday car that regular people drove, or a cherished classic car that collectors loved and cared about deeply, he treated every vehicle with respect. He explained mechanical concepts and ideas in plain, simple language that anyone could understand, stripping away all the intimidation and scary technical stuff, and replacing it with real understanding. Complex repairs that seemed impossible became something that viewers could actually follow along with and even imagine trying themselves in their own garages. That honesty and realness became the show's signature and what it was known for. As the years stacked up one after another, Wheeler Dealers grew into way more than just a TV program that aired once a week. It became a reference point and a benchmark for so many fans around the world. It was the exact reason why some people picked up a wrench or spanner for the first time in their lives. It was the reason why garages and driveways all over turned into weekend workshops, where people would spend their free time working on cars. That huge influence and impact eventually pushed China beyond just being on the TV screen. Drawing directly from all his experience on the show over the years, he wrote and published a book called The Wheeler Dealer's Car Restoration Manual. It was aimed squarely and directly at budding restorers, people who wanted to learn how to do things properly and correctly, not just perfectly with no mistakes. By the time China decided to step away from the show in 2017, Wheeler Dealers had completely cemented itself as his most recognizable and well-known work. For over a full decade, viewers from all around the world had watched him take worn-out cars that looked like they should be junked and turn them into something actually worth saving and keeping. Week after week, season after season, he just kept doing it. At his absolute peak and height, he wasn't just some TV mechanic reading lines from a script. He was the actual face of practical, real car restoration for an entire generation of people who loved cars. And that's exactly why what came next and happened after hit so incredibly hard and felt so devastating to fans. Why Ed China decided to walk away from Wheeler Dealers. For many years, Ed China wasn't just the mechanic who appeared on Wheeler Dealers. He was actually the show's entire backbone and foundation. The calm, clear explanations he gave, the long and meticulous workshop sequences where nothing was rushed, the real sense that nothing was being rushed through, skipped over quickly, or dressed up and made fancy just for time constraints. That patience and attention to detail was the whole point of the show. Viewers tuned in every single week because they truly trusted him and believed in what he was doing. They trusted that what they were seeing on their screens was completely real and honest. And for 13 full years, that formula and approach worked reliably and quietly, episode after episode, until one day it suddenly didn't work anymore. After more than a full decade working alongside Mike Brewer as a team, China made the really difficult decision to walk away from the show completely. He didn't leave because he was burned out or exhausted from working too much. He didn't leave because of a big ego or because he wanted more attention and fame or a different kind of spotlight shining on him. He left for one specific reason, because the show that he had personally helped build from the ground up was being reshaped and changed into something he no longer recognized anymore. And more importantly than anything else, it was being changed into something he could no longer stand behind or support with his name and reputation. The shift and change began when a brand new production company called Velocity took over control of making the show. Their vision and idea for what the show should be was completely different from before. They wanted things tighter, cheaper to make, and faster to produce. The detailed workshop segments that showed all the work being done, the very thing that had made Wheeler Dealers feel grounded, honest, and real to viewers, were suddenly being treated like a problem that needed to be fixed. In the eyes and opinions of the new producers, those segments took way too long to film and shoot. They cost too much money to produce. They required too much effort from everyone involved. In the producers' minds and thinking, the depth and detail that had once defined the show and made it special had somehow become an obstacle getting in their way. China didn't lash out angrily or lose his temper. He didn't leak his frustrations and complaints to tabloid newspapers or hint at drama and conflict through carefully worded interviews with reporters. Instead, he decided to explain his position and reasoning himself, calmly and directly, through a statement he posted on his own YouTube channel. He said very clearly that the producers had found Wheeler Dealers too difficult to make in its current format and the way it was being done. More specifically and precisely, they wanted to reduce and cut back on the in-depth coverage of his workshop repairs, the detailed technical explanations that he personally considered to be the show's unique selling point and what made it different from everything else. To him, those scenes and segments weren't just filler to pad out the runtime. They weren't just padding to make episodes longer. They were the actual spine and backbone of the entire program. He acknowledged and understood the reality and reasoning behind the decision the producers had made. The workshop segments really were the hardest and most difficult part of the show to produce and create. They demanded a lot of time, precision, and accuracy and repetition of shots. Cutting them down and making them shorter would definitely save production effort, save money from the budget, and avoid scheduling headaches and problems. But that compromise and trade-off came at a cost that he personally wasn't willing to accept or agree to. China explained very clearly that the corners he was being asked to cut would directly undermine and hurt the quality of his work. And slowly, over time, it would erode and destroy his integrity as a mechanic, along with the integrity of the show itself. When faced with that exact choice between compromising his work or leaving, he came to the conclusion that the only real option left available to him was to step aside completely and let Velocity move forward and continue making the show without him being involved. His exit and departure opened the door and created an opportunity for Ant Anstead to come in. Ant was a mechanic that viewers already respected and liked watching, and he was someone who fit more comfortably and easily into the streamlined format that the producers wanted and had planned. The show continued airing new episodes. The basic structure remained familiar to viewers. But for longtime fans who had watched from the beginning, it really wasn't the same show anymore. It wasn't the show that China had originally signed up to make all those years ago. And it definitely wasn't the one they had fallen in love with and looked forward to watching every week. What made the entire situation even heavier and more difficult was what wasn't actually said out loud. China never once blamed Brewer for what happened. He never accused him of betrayal or said they had creative conflicts or arguments. He kept his focus firmly and squarely on the production changes and the creative direction the show was taking. Still, despite his careful words, the departure clearly landed very close to home and was personal. From the outside looking in, it appeared that Brewer took the decision really personally, even though China had gone completely out of his way not to frame it or present it that way. And just like that, in what felt like a single moment, a partnership that had defined Wheeler Dealers for over a full decade quietly fractured and broke apart. It didn't happen with a dramatic on-screen blow-up or explosive fight. It didn't happen with accusations flying or shouting matches caught on camera. It happened with a disagreement over basic principles and values. It was about depth versus speed, real craft versus convenience and shortcuts. For fans watching all of this unfold, it wasn't just a simple cast change where one host got replaced by another. It felt like the exact moment when the heart of the show, the thing that made it special, was removed and ripped out completely. It's the real reason Mike and Ed never got back together. For 13 full seasons, Mike Brewer and Ed China were Wheeler Dealers. They weren't just hosts reading scripts. They weren't just colleagues who clocked in to do a job and clocked out at the end of the day. The balance between the two of them defined the entire show and what it was about. One of them found the cars, negotiated the deals with sellers, and set the stakes for each episode. The other one took those same cars and brought them back from the edge of being completely worthless, piece by piece, bolt by bolt, slowly putting them back together. For viewers watching at home, it felt solid and permanent, like a partnership that was built to last forever, something that would always be there when you turned on your TV. Then in 2017, suddenly it wasn't there anymore. The split between them didn't come completely out of nowhere like a surprise. It followed a growing disagreement and tension between China and the show's producers, one that had been simmering and building behind the scenes for quite a while. According to China's own words, the frustration had been building up inside him for some time. Decisions were being made by people in charge to short episodes, streamline the production process, and move faster through everything. But those changes came at a real cost that couldn't be ignored. To save valuable time and money, the show began cutting back on the very thing that viewers loved the most. The detailed, in-depth workshop coverage where everything was explained, the patience China showed, the craft and skill involved. For China personally, those workshop sequences weren't just optional extras that could be cut out. They were the entire point of why the show existed. Speaking directly to fans on his YouTube channel shortly after leaving the show, he didn't dodge the issue or try to soften his stance to make people happy. He explained very honestly that he wasn't willing to cut corners or compromise his standards. He laid it all out plainly and directly. The workshop jobs were the hardest part of the entire show to make and film. They demanded lots of time, repetition of shots and takes, and close attention to every little detail. Reducing their role and importance in the show would absolutely save production time, effort from the crew, and money from the budget. But it would also hollow out the show from the inside and remove what made it special. From China's perspective and point of view, being asked to simplify his work compromised and lowered its quality. And it chipped away at and damaged his integrity as a craftsman, along with the integrity of the program itself that had his name attached to it. That line, once it was crossed, couldn't be uncrossed or fixed. There was no going back. Publicly at first, both men initially tried really hard to keep things calm and under control. The early message that went out was controlled and very restrained. There was no feud or ongoing fight, no shouting match caught on camera, no dramatic falling out between friends. It was just presented as a simple decision by China to move on with his life and pursue his own projects and ideas. On the surface, to most people, it sounded clean, professional, and almost boring in how normal it seemed. But behind that carefully crafted narrative and story, the situation was already becoming personal and emotional. 6 days after China's departure was officially announced to the public, Brewer called him on the phone over a weekend. According to reports from people who knew about the call, Brewer explained during that conversation that he, his wife, and his young daughter were all receiving serious online abuse and harassment in the wake of China leaving the show. The backlash from angry fans was intense, emotional, and completely misplaced. Some messages that were sent reportedly escalated and got so bad that they included actual death threats against him and his family. Fans were angry and confused about what had happened, and many of them aimed that anger directly at Brewer like a weapon, blaming him personally for China's exit from the show. That single phone call changed the tone of absolutely everything between them. China's response to the situation didn't calm the waters or make things better. While he continued to insist that production changes were the real and true reason for his departure, he also admitted something else that was hard to hear. He said that Brewer was not his favorite person at that particular moment in time. He acknowledged openly that they had disagreed over the show's future and where it should go. It was the first real crack in the idea and image that everything between them was totally fine, and there were no problems. The partnership that had once been presented as unshakable and permanent sud. ZNLY looked fragile and delicate, like it could break apart completely at any moment. Brewer, for his part inside of things, continued to deny strongly that there had been any argument or fight between them. He repeatedly stated over and over in interviews that there was no feud happening, no explosion of anger, no dramatic split that people were imagining. But he also admitted something else that revealed his true feelings. He said he actually cried real tears when China left the show. That detail, in fact, mattered a lot. It revealed and showed just how much the partnership had truly meant to him on a personal level, and how deeply the loss landed and hurt him, even if he struggled to find the words to articulate it and explain it publicly to other people. Despite that raw emotion and those real tears, the distance between the two men only grew wider and wider as time went on. Years passed by, one after another. According to both men's own accounts, they hadn't actually seen each other in person since a meeting that took place in a Paris hotel roughly 7 years earlier. Brewer later described that night in Paris as the last time they were actually together in the same place, drinking and talking with each other before everything ended between them. No reconciliation followed after that night. No quiet catch-up over coffee to clear the air. No private resolution behind closed doors, just silence. As more time went on and passed, Brewer's tone and attitude shifted and changed noticeably. Speaking on a podcast called The Road to Success, he suggested and hinted that he felt used by his former co-host. He explained that throughout his entire life, he had often helped people build their careers and get ahead in the industry. And if there was controversy and drama surrounding China's departure that made people angry at him, it left him feeling like he had been just a tool in that process, something China used and then threw away. He insisted that he wasn't bitter or holding a grudge, but the disappointment in his voice was unmistakable and obvious. It sat just beneath the surface of his words, clear to anyone really listening. China, meanwhile, moved on with his life in a very different way than Brewer did. He didn't chase after another television format or try to recreate Wheeler Dealers under a brand new name with different branding. Instead, he built and grew his own YouTube channel from scratch. He returned to what he had always valued the most: long, detailed repair work done in his own garage. No producers telling him what to do, no time limits cutting him off, no executives breathing down his neck asking him to simplify things or speed up. Just him, the cars he loved, and the depth and detail he believed in showing. Back on Wheeler Dealers, Brewer continued hosting without China by his side. Ant Anstead stepped in to fill the role as the new co-host and mechanic. The show survived the change. It adapted to the new format. Later on, even that partnership eventually changed when Ant eventually handed the role over to former Formula One mechanic Mark Priestley, who became the next mechanic host. The format continued airing new episodes. New faces came and went as hosts. But the original dynamic and chemistry between Mike and Ed never returned or came back. Brewer continued to insist strongly that nothing dramatic had actually happened between them. In his own words, which he repeated in interviews, a guy left his job. That was it, nothing more, nothing less. He also claimed that after leaving the show, China had criticized the show publicly in videos and statements, which was something Brewer chose not to respond to or engage with. Still, despite all his denials and explanations, the silence between the two men spoke way louder than any denial ever could. In later interviews that came out more recently, Brewer added even more context and details to the story. Speaking to Car Dealer magazine, he described China as becoming increasingly disenchanted and unhappy during their final year together working on the show. The long, exhausting days spent in the workshop, especially while they were filming episodes in California, wore him down physically and mentally. Brewer painted a picture of someone who had simply reached his absolute limit and couldn't keep going anymore. He stressed again and repeated that there were no arguments or fights, no shouting matches, and no betrayal by anyone. China wasn't pushed out against his will. He wasn't tricked or lied to. He wasn't cheated out of anything. According to Brewer, China just had enough and decided he was done. Yet when Brewer later compared the entire situation to talking about a girlfriend from 7 years ago who you used to date, the loss landed differently and felt more personal. He admitted openly and honestly that he wished they were still friends and could talk. He said that he had reached out more than once, trying to reconnect and rebuild what they had. But the calls weren't returned or answered. The messages went without replies. For fans who had watched them together for over a decade, that may be the hardest part to accept and deal with. It wasn't a blow-up that made headlines. It wasn't a scandal that got talked about everywhere. It wasn't a dramatic on-screen fallout that everyone could see and point to. It was just two people who had built something absolutely massive and successful together. And then they quietly drifted so far apart from each other that even reconciliation and making up stopped feeling possible or realistic. And that heavy silence has lingered and hung in the air ever since, with no signs of changing. Inside Ed China's love life, the one part of his story few people talk about. For someone whose entire life has been defined by engines, deadlines, and television schedules that never stopped, Ed China has kept the most personal part of his world deliberately low-key and out of the public eye. Away from workshops and production crews, away from cameras and lights, he built something quieter and steadier, a life that doesn't perform for the camera and doesn't explain itself to strangers or feel the need to justify anything. In a career that has been shaped by constant output and public scrutiny from millions of viewers, this part of his world moves at a completely different speed and rhythm. Ed is married to a woman named Imogen China, who is originally from Norway. Their relationship doesn't arrive with big headlines in magazines or long interviews in newspapers. It surfaces gently, almost accidentally, like something you notice without it demanding attention. A photo posted here, a shared moment captured there. Instagram posts that feel unpolished and unforced, not posed perfectly, not strategic or planned out. Just two people who are clearly comfortable and happy in the same frame together. There's real affection between them that you can see, but it's quiet and subtle. It's the kind of thing you notice because it isn't desperately trying to be noticed or seeking validation. They were together as a couple for many years before ever making anything official or public. They chose time together and privacy over spectacle and public announcements. There was no rushed announcement to the press, no public countdown on social media. When they finally did decide to formalize their relationship and get married, they did it entirely on their own terms, the way they wanted. They had an invite-only wedding in London. No press was allowed, no media rollout or coverage. No branded moment for sponsors. Just close friends, family members, and a decision that had clearly been settled and decided long before anyone else in the world knew about it. There's very little that's publicly known about their lives before they met each other. There are no neat timelines available to map out and follow. No past relationships to compare or dissect and analyze. And that silence doesn't feel accidental at all. It feels protected and guarded on purpose. What really matters to them isn't what came before in their separate lives. It's what followed after they found each other. The sense that they discovered something stable enough that it didn't need a backstory or explanation. Something that didn't require justification to anyone else. There's also very little information available out there about children or extended family members. Again, that absence and lack of information speaks volumes and says a lot. Ed has always drawn a very firm line between what belongs to the audience who watches him and what doesn't. He's never confused visibility and being on TV with giving people access to every part of his life. His marriage sits firmly on the private side of that line, and it stays there without any apology or explanation to anyone. What is visible and what we can see is the life they share together now in the present. There's an adventurous rhythm to how they live, traveling to different places, spending time outdoors in nature, laughter caught mid-moment in candid photos rather than staged perfectly for the camera. Their closeness and connection shows up not in big declarations or statements, but in small things like posture and body language, in the way they stand near each other naturally, in how relaxed and at ease they look when they're in the same space together. There's absolutely no sense of performance or putting on a show. No need to sell an image to anyone. Imogen is often described by people who know her as having a gentle heart and a kind nature, and that softness feels like a perfect counterbalance to the intensity of Ed's professional world. His career demanded precision, constant pressure, and nonstop problem solving. There were always deadlines looming, budgets that couldn't be broken, cameras watching everything, and expectations from millions of people. Their relationship, by contrast, appears to offer something much simpler and more peaceful. It offers calm, grounding stability, a place where he doesn't have to explain himself or prove anything to anyone. He can just be himself without any pressure. In the middle of all the public scrutiny, career upheaval and changes and creative battles over the show, this part of Ed's life didn't fracture or break apart. It didn't get louder or more dramatic. It didn't spill outward into the public eye. It held quietly and steadily like an anchor. And that matters so much because when absolutely everything else in his life shifted and changed, this one thing didn't. It stayed constant. Remember Ed China from Wheeler Dealers. His life now is heartbreaking. There was a time not too long ago when everything Ed China touched seemed to roll forward effortlessly like magic. Ideas inside his head became actual machines you could touch. Machines became memorable moments. And moments became television history that people still talk about today. Each step forward felt connected, purposeful, and almost inevitable, like it was always meant to happen that way. But after the spotlight dimmed and faded, and the familiar structure of Wheeler Dealers disappeared from his life, the road ahead stopped looking smooth and easy. What followed wasn't a clean fall or a dramatic collapse that happened all at once. It was something quieter and more uncomfortable to watch. It was a constant need to keep moving forward, to keep building new things, to keep proving over and over that there was still fuel left in the tank and he wasn't finished yet. Long before the Wheeler Dealers split even happened, China had already been trying hard to secure his independence and build something of his own. Riding the momentum and success from his work as a special effects technician on Father Ted, he set up a company called Comfy Banana Limited in March of 1999. It was meant to be a home base for his extreme creations and wild inventions, the sort of unusual machines that didn't fit neatly inside traditional television formats or normal car shows. These machines weren't just gimmicks or silly jokes. They were proof of concept, showing that his ideas could actually work in the real world. By 2001, ITV was already paying attention to him and what he was building. They interviewed him about those vehicles on a show called Pulling Power. A few years later, in 2006, he was back on ITV again, this time appearing on the morning talk show This Morning. He was still talking about the same wild machines, still pushing forward with new ideas and projects. The momentum looked real and promising. But momentum doesn't always protect you from what comes next. A success doesn't guarantee more success. In 2009, China incorporated another company called Grease Junkie Limited, and he stepped in as the managing director to run it. The brand grew outward in different directions. There was merchandise for fans to buy, an e-commerce website, Wheeler Dealers products, Grease Junkie gear and clothing. Fans finally had a way to own a piece of the world they'd watched and loved for years. Alongside all of that, China also owned an MOT and servicing garage located in Bracknell, Berkshire, which was also called Grease Junkie. On paper, looking at it from the outside, it looked solid, well-structured, and sustainable for the long term. In reality, it wasn't sustainable at all. In August of 2016, the garage was voluntarily liquidated and shut down. There was no scandal or controversy, no big headlines in newspapers, no explanation tour where he had to defend.